profound urgency and transformative vision that I stand today to address key objective 5 of the Sendai Gender Action Plan, integrating gender equality criteria into risk informed disaster risk reduction investments. This objective addresses a critical gap that undermines the effectiveness of DRR efforts worldwide. The Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030 recognizes that substantial investment is required to achieve disaster risk reduction goals. However, a fundamental challenge persists that investment decisions for risk informed development and DRR often do not account for how gender inequality alters the impact and effectiveness of such investments. This oversight means that billions of dollars in DRR funding fail to achieve their full potential because they do not adequately address gender specific vulnerabilities and needs. Much more needs to be done to ensure that gender equality is a key criterion for funding decisions, underpinned by gender responsive budgeting and investment in education and capacity development. A significant increase in funding for DRR actions that achieve gender equality objectives is required, ensuring these are directly accessible to women's organizations and gender inclusion stakeholders for local level implementation. Gender responsive investments address gender differences and involve the meaningful leadership and participation of all genders, ensuring that all DRR investment decisions yield equitable benefits for people of all genders and social groups. When DRR investments ignore gender, they often reinforce existing inequalities rather than reducing them. For example, infrastructure projects that don't consider women's safety may increase women's risk of violence, while livelihood programs that target only male heads of households may exclude women who are actually the primary economic actors. Gender responsive investments should consider core principles like addressing structural inequalities between men and women that lead to chronic vulnerabilities, recognizing and promoting women's existing capacities, directly benefiting women not just as co benefits, and being designed and implemented by women as primary beneficiaries. India provides compelling examples for integrating gender equality into DRR investments. The National Disaster Management Authority NDMA has established gender responsive budgeting guidelines that require all DRR projects to include specific provisions for women's need. The NDMA's Disaster Risk Reduction and Resilience Building Program mandates that 30% of project beneficiaries must be women with separate budget allocations for women specific activities. The Odisha State Disaster Management Authority has integrated gender criteria into its cyclone preparedness investments. During Cyclone Foni in 2019, the state invested rupees 2.5 billion in cyclone shelters that included separate women's dormitories, location rooms, sanitary facilities, and childcare centers. Women were employed as shelter managers and security personnel, ensuring women's safety and dignity. Kerala's State Disaster Management Authority has established a gender responsive DRR fund with rupees 500 million dedicated to women led disaster resilience initiatives. The fund supports women's self help groups under Kudumbosri to conduct community based risk assessments, organize disaster preparedness training, and manage post disaster relief. Women's organizations receive direct funding without requiring male intermediaries, empowering them as primary DRR actors. The Gujarat State Disaster Management Authority has invested in disaster micro insurance targeted specifically at women farmers and women headed households. Through the SWA Self Employed Women's Association partnership, over 50,000 women farmers have accessed micro insurance coverage for crop losses due to droughts and floods. This investment directly benefits women as primary beneficiaries, addressing their economic vulnerabilities. In Andhra Pradesh, the government has invested in resilient housing microfinance products specifically for urban poor women, enabling them to construct flood resistant homes. The program provides subsidized interest rates and gender sensitive loan terms, addressing women's limited access to formal credit. The Philippines has established the Gender and Disaster Risk Reduction Fund with 2 billion dedicated to women's DRR initiatives. The fund supports women's organizations in conducting community based disaster preparedness, managing evacuation centers, and advocating for gender responsive reconstruction. In Nepal, the Green Climate Fund has allocated 35% of its DRR resources to women led natural resources management projects. Post earthquake reconstruction programs include gender criteria requiring that at least 50% of construction workers must be women with equal pay and safety protections. The Pacific Islands have integrated gender criteria into their disaster risk reduction investment framework. Fiji's National Disaster Management Office has established women led MSME development programs with dedicated funding for disaster resilient small businesses. The Asian Development Bank has developed gender responsive investment guidelines for DRR projects, requiring all ADB funded DRR initiatives to include gender equality criteria. These include livelihood diversification targeted at women farmers, transfer programs for women headed households, and public works programs targeting women. Despite progress, significant barriers persist. Many DRR investment frameworks lack explicit gender criteria, allowing gender considerations to be overlooked in budget allocation decisions. To achieve key objective 5, each country should establish mandatory gender equality criteria in all DRR investment frameworks, including gender analysis requirements, women's beneficiary quotas, and gender specific budget allocations. Implement should be done for gender responsive budgeting across all government DRR programs, tracking and reporting on gender specific expenditures, creation of direct funding mechanisms is necessary for women's organizations and gender inclusion stakeholders, enabling them to access DRR funds without intermediaries. Building of technical capacity for gender responsive investment design among financial institutions, government agencies, and DRR practitioners is necessary. Establishment of accountability mechanisms to monitor whether DRR investments achieve gender equality objectives with consequences for non-compliance is also necessary. When gender equality criteria guide DRR investments is possible, we can address structural vulnerabilities, leverage women's capacities, and create transformational change. Thank you.